Howdy guys, Jimmy Song here. In this video, I'm going to talk about the ethics of money production. And that's, the topic itself is very interesting, but it's also a book and it's free for download on Mises.org. The link is below. Anyway, it very fascinating book going through what money production is and, like what the people in power over money production tend to do. Turns out like everyone from Roman emperors to, every medieval prince and king and queen or whoever, they debased their currency. And that was a way for them to, gain money for themselves. And of course, this is ethically wrong. And that's what it largely talks about. But it goes on to talk about the advent of central banking, paper money, and sort of debasing across the board, which paper money allows, instead of like debasing a particular coin. So with coin debasement, what usually happens is, they collect a bunch of taxes, and then they take each coin and melt it all down and put less silver in it or less gold in it or whatever. So you have one batch of money that is debased, but the other batch of money is not debased. So, it's like a slower and messier process because some coins actually have more of the metal content than others. So, somebody that's really careful that can look and see what's going on. Well, they either switch to another money or they keep the better ones or whatever. With paper money, it's a little different because you just print more of the paper money and that acts as debasement, but it debases all of the currency, right, at the same time. So it's a lot more uniform in its debasement. But one of the things that it talks a lot about is when you have central banking and debasement, it causes a lot of people to think way much more about money than they ought to. And this is one of the arguments in the book, is that modern society, we think way too much about money. And if you think about it, the last 100 years or so, there have been all of these markets that have sort of cropped up as a result of fiat money. So for example, the entire foreign exchange market, there's literally trillions of dollars traded between, the yen and the dollar and the Canadian dollar and the euro and the yuan and all these other currencies. There's trillions and trillions of dollars just trading back and forth. And these are all middlemen, right? Like they're not really providing anything other than liquidity on both sides. It used to be under the gold standard, La Belle Epoque, 1870 to about 1910, when the world was on the gold standard. That market didn't exist because you could take a dollar, redeem it for gold, and then take that gold and redeem it for the British pound or whatever, and you would have essentially the same quantity or a bill representing the same quantity of gold. So it was all just math back and forth. It was all the same money basically, and that allowed for prosperity. There wasn't a tax every time you needed to switch between things. Between currencies, but now there is, and that tax is there largely because central banks want to have their own monetary policy and be able to print at their own rate, which is kind of crazy. But that's one way in which we have to think way more about money. Another way in which we have to think way more about money is that there's no sound money anymore. So you have to keep up with inflation. You have to keep up with debasement. So they come up with like investment professionals, right? Like people whose job it is to keep up with inflation. Or try to beat it in the ideal case, but at the very least, keep up with inflation. Like the CPI numbers, right? That's the consumer price index. That's supposedly like 1 or 2%, and that's complete fiction, guys. Like you look at the actual CPI and how it's calculated and how they have like quality adjustments and things like that. That could totally fudge the numbers in any way they want. Basically, it says it's 1 or 2%, but it's really not. Your money, like the actual monetary supplies, like more like 6, 7, 8%, and that's probably closer to the actual consumer prices as well. Because you look at a price like 10 years ago, a lot of things have like doubled in price, gone up 70, 80%. If it were only going up at 1 or 2%, then that wouldn't be the case, right? Like you wouldn't see a burrito that was $5 10 years ago now like all of a sudden like $8, $9, $10, right? Like that's it's complete fiction. But anyway, part of that is you have these investment professionals and like all of these other things that are trying to keep up with inflation. And they've come up with this strategy of diversification, right? And the only reason that exists is because there's no stable store of value. If you had gold or something like that kept its value, and arguably gold is like that, but it's a heavily manipulated commodity. You know, you don't have to think that much about it. And when people are forced to put way too much thought into money, they necessarily detract thoughts from other stuff, and that's kind of terrible for society, right? Like I think we'd rather much more be thinking about how to make civilization better, how to make society better, how to do things in a way that makes civilization more efficient, more inventions, more entrepreneurism, innovations. Those are the things that our minds ought to be going towards. Instead, so much thought and mental energy of an entire population goes towards money. And some really fascinating other ideas in the book about how when you're printing money, you're really just counterfeiting, and that's ethically very, very wrong. But I thought it was a really interesting book. Totally take a look at it. Has a lot of relevance to Bitcoin in my mind, because really the big problem I think that it alludes to is centralized money production. When you have a sovereign that decides what the money is, that's kind of what you end up with. Bitcoin is different and prevents a lot of these bad behaviors that result from centralized money production. Anyway, hope that helps you. This song is done.